Hello. So we are in session three, and today we're going to talk about the importance of thinking on a collective level in our practice. So I wanted to begin, share my screen. Something we're also going to talk about today is preparing you guys for your projects, and I'll show you guys some examples of previous projects. And we're going to do a little writing exercise to think through how we might dive into these research projects. Um, and before we dive in, I wanted to sort of saying in the beginning, I wanted to just hold a little bit of space to talk about, the sort of radical shifts we're seeing on a political and policy level right now. Certainly in the States, and I know we've got a few people here joining from different parts of the world. And this is largely not just a phenomenon um, that's happening in the US. It's sort of a global phenomenon we're seeing in a lot of different areas. And yeah, I have to admit, like I had nightmares last night. It's quite chilling what's going on right now. But I am I think the way that I'm personally uh finding paths through things that are happening right now is sort of by doubling down on the work that I'm doing that I find meaningful, that is encompasses my community and my ecosystem. And yeah, so I just wanted to hold space if anybody wants to talk about things that are happening in their own sphere. And I also wanted to lift up this quote. It's this what you see here. This is at Metabolic Studio, which is a project initiated by Lauren Bond that Mary Mattingly spoke to a bit in our session two course. And Lauren has this like this comes up again and again in my experience working with her and just watching Metabolic Studio. But this quote of like, artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. Um, so I just wanted to lift that up a little bit before we dive in today. And whoops, let me move. Okay, so we're going to talk about objectives, relationships, and alliances. So let me just dive right into this. So today we're going to go through several writing exercises, but they're pretty simple. But we're going to do a collective free write, and I'll show you what that looks like in a bit. And we're going to think through some questions that I'm going to offer, and I'm first going to sort of walk us through these questions in a slideshow before we do that exercise. And then Lucia is going to join us at 3 p.m. So establishing needs. So bef in beginning to orient your practice towards the collective, I think it's healthy to first take stock of our own needs. So what are your needs in your work and your community? Um, what are the needs of your work environment or the community you work with? What sustainability issues do you identify in your community or work environment? And sorry, I'm gonna get a little bit more into the weeds of your own goals here. So in defining your own goals, I like to present some of these questions to help think through this. Um, I spent a long time finding my voice in my own practice, and it took a lot of sort of living on the edge of culture, trying to get to some fundamental questions about myself and the world and understand the world around me. So some questions I'm presenting here for you guys are, what are your core values? What do you stand for? What does your work stand for? Why is it important to work towards sustainability in your practice? What barriers might you face in trying to do so? And then we're gonna do a writing exercise where you guys can I'm a big fan of free writes where you're just sort of letting your conscious flow. I think a lot of things can start to come up in free writing. Begin to open up some access to our unconscious and let some deeper things come through. And we're going to think strategically about ways you can achieve these goals. I also want to lift up in considering how our practice might meet the collective, this notion of interbeing, which is a term coined by Thich Nhat Hanh. It refers to the interconnectedness of all things connected to life through our actions, feelings, thoughts, and basically everything else. So, how are these goals that you have a part of a larger network? And as I sort of asked like two slides prior, let's see if I can go back. Yeah. What are the needs and of your community and your ecosystem? So in thinking about this larger network, who, what, and where does your practice engage human and non-human entities? Are there entities, people, or ideas we can engage to foster interbeing? And remember, I showed you guys earlier, I believe it was in session one, this sort of model of thinking through the ecological model, where your practice might engage, maybe it's mostly between self and environment. Maybe you're wildcrafting materials in the woods. Maybe you're focusing on community. For example, like the community loom project that I did. Or maybe you're thinking about societal level issues. Let me let Jane in. Hi, Jane. We're just walking through some a slideshow where I'm introducing how we might begin to think of our practice as encompassing the collective. So, in addition to thinking in the present in this way, right? So, how is my practice connected to community, society, environment? I also want to invite us to think transtemporally. So, like thinking about the historical precedents that we are currently on the receiving end of within this network of relationships, right? And I'm borrowing this term, visualizing historical consciousness, from a book that I'm gonna show you guys the cover of shortly. It's a book that my mentor Susan Jahota co-wrote. And within it, she talks about it's called Making and Being. So how do our it's for creative practitioners. It's also, I think I may have mentioned this in an earlier class, it's also available for free online, the whole thing. So in that book, they talk about this concept of visualizing historical consciousness, and they present this a similar diagram. So the quote, the institutions and social norms we are surrounded by are currently and have historically shaped us. We are both in a historical moment and strongly shaped by the flow of history before us. Really, we are changing both our internal and external worlds simultaneously because the social context has shaped us too. And I'm bringing this up because I think that as you're starting to center the ecosystem in your practice, we have to also ask ourselves, what historical precedents are we on the receiving end of that have shaped the strengths and the needs of our current context, right? And I think this can be especially important when you are living on, for example, unceded lands. And like in the context of America, I think it's very, very important to do some homework in understanding the cultural history of the place, let alone I think it's also often helpful to look into the economic history of your place. Like oftentimes that's where we can locate uh, legacies of extraction that have happened in the land. Um, for example, I live half of the time in Cleveland, Ohio, where my family and my partner are. And Cleveland is one of the Rust Belt cities. in the Midwest. So there's sort of Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland. And, there's a deep history of industrial um, sort of expansion that happened there at a certain point in time. And we're sort of, yeah, it's important to like be with the layered histories that are of your place. I was reading, I think I may have mentioned this. I was reading this book, Art in the Anthropocene, which Mary is actually on the cover of. And I was reading this chapter called Indigenizing the Anthropocene. And I came across this Indigenous historian that Zoe Todd, who wrote that essay, um, mentioned, and she cites his definition of the ethic of historical consciousness. So I wanted to just, in building upon the last slide, read his interpretation of this. So, quote, the ethic holds that the past occurs simultaneously in the present and influences how we conceptualize the future. It requires that we see ourselves related to and implicated in the lives of those yet to come. It is an ethical imperative to recognize the significance of the relationships we have with others, how our histories and experiences are layered and position us in relation to each other, and how our futures as people are similarly are tied. It is also an ethical imperative to see that despite our varied place-based cultures and knowledge systems, we live in the world together with others and must constantly think and act with reverence to those relationships. Any knowledge we gain about the world interweaves us more deeply with these relationships and gives us life. And I did locate that she lifted this quote from a text that he wrote called For Its Curriculum and Indigenous Métissage, Imagining Decolonization of Aboriginal Canadian Relations in Educational Contexts. So I'm excited to dig into that. You can sort of Google it and find it pretty easily. So, local relationships. What relationships of mutual benefit can we create within our communities? What are you receiving in this relationship? What can you contribute? I oftentimes might suggest starting by finding people who have similar values or hobbies to you or interests. What sustainable systems are we able to develop through partnerships? I also love this term, cultural catalyst. So how can you become a cultural catalyst in your bioregional context? What are the cultural benefits of these relationships that might be underway in your practice? How is the culture around you impacted? How can you create the conditions for this to happen? So, for example, an art show, programming, gathering, or digital presence on like local scales. Coordination. So this is again from Making and Being. I want to talk a little bit about coordinations. Coordination. So, quote, the ability to effectively collaborate with others in teams, partnerships, alliances, and remain responsive to evolving conditions. And here's another quote from Making and Being, and this is the book that I mentioned. People often say artist types can't coordinate. It would be like herding cats. If you dismiss the possibility of coordination in the arts, calling it impractical or impossible, we suggest that you attempt to become curious about this sense of impossibility. How might this contradiction be part of a historical debate or struggle about the field of art itself? Could this contradiction between the individual and the collective be generative? And if you guys remember back to when we were talking about this social turn, how in the arts we see a lot of art practices turning towards the social sphere to meet the needs of people and ecosystems when larger systems such as the government are sort of failing to meet those needs. So art might be becoming, what I'm offering is that art might be becoming the new place to learn civics. And then I think I'm getting towards the end here, but I want to lift up this concept of cultural sustainability, which is the maintaining of cultural beliefs, cultural practices, heritage conservation, culture as its own entity, and attempts to answer the question of whether or not any given cultures will exist in the context of the future. So, are there cultural practices that are historical to your landscape to your lineage to the cultures around you. How might we tap into that, into those practices? Plan. So then in our writing, we're going to dream seed perhaps a plan and think through what a potential path forward for of action might look like. And I do encourage you guys if you are because I gave you guys a bunch of resources and something I gave you sort of two locations of resources. One is in a Google Doc filled with a folder of folders. And then the others through the CAIS, the Center for Art Education and Sustainability website, with those sort of old scanned resource pages with different mediums. But I also encourage you guys to learn through. You can do your own Google searching. There's a lot of information out there. But most importantly, by going out and learning your own region, bioregion. Okay, so these plants, oh, and I lastly wanted to say try to go deep over wide. So not trying to do too many different new practices at once, but rather sort of digging into one or maybe two practices, depending on where you're at and what you're trying to do. I think I mentioned that I studied herbalism for a few years, and my teacher once counseled us to learn one herb per year. And at the time I was like trying to learn all of them at the same time, because I was just so hungry for the knowledge. But I think there's so much wisdom in that, and it's certainly in my own practice. I work closely with the black walnut tree, and I first encountered black walnut ink and I fell in love with it, but it took me a couple of years to really develop a sustainable practice, which looked like locating the black walnut trees, learning how to find them, what habitats they are predominantly live in, how to harvest from the black walnut tree in a way that doesn't take away from the needs of the creatures around me. And further, how to process and preserve the ink, let alone how to use it. So, anyways, these plans that you guys are going to think through are living documents. They're constantly going to be modified in order to adjust to the needs, resources, and partnerships you're involved with that are also constantly changing. So I want to show you guys some project examples of some past participants. This is Susan Snipes, and she is located in Cleveland, Ohio, and she did this project she called Neo Materials, Forage Local on Hand. So she made charcoal, which I don't think I spoke too much about. If anybody is interested in making charcoal, I've done quite a bit of it, and I would love to talk a bit more of it about it if anybody would like to hear. But so she made some charcoal, drawing charcoal. She also made some acorn ink, and she has a background in photography, so she's also her documentation is so beautiful. She made marigold ink. And then she used these materials to make her own works. She was also foraging some rocks on the shores of Lake Erie and grinding those up to make pigments. Here you see some old bricks too. Nicole is living in Brazil, so very different context. And I love to talk about this project because the needs of her community were so different and their relationship to like art with a capital A was so different than, for example, Susan's in a like Midwest American context. So Nicole worked with a local herbalist to use medicine and food from the region to make pigments and inks with. And then she also made maybe I don't have pictures in here, but she made like chalk sticks with local what did she call it? Dry pastel with local earth pigment. And she was saying that it didn't really like people don't really hang art, paintings, art objects on the walls there. And like in this, she was in quite a remote village. So what made more sense, yeah, here's the dry pastels. What made more sense was for them to co-create, make their work together, and then sort of parade it. They had a parade through the village, and then they hung them all on trees. So again, these practices are specific to your bioregion. And here's Beth Shepherd. She processed different inks and made charcoal and did this weaving. And this is connected to a deeper investigation around soil properties and soil health. Andy, who's in California, she was working with, and this was, around the time of the fires out west, the most recent huge ones near LA. And she's a little ways north of there, but there's still like many forest fires that have passed through her region. And there's a lot of grief that she feels sort of well up in herself and the landscape and the community. And so she was making uh, pigment from ash from the charcoal from these burnt forest sites. And then she would use that to then do landscape drawings and paintings. And she also integrated this into a community practice, which I don't have pictures of, but it was really beautiful. She There were conversations around, the grief of these fires that were highly intergenerational, including a lot of children and elders. Linda did this project around sound foraging. She's a sound artist, and I just love this concept of sound foraging. Ani she was sort of building upon this project that she calls One of Many, and you can find her on Instagram. She is so inspiring to work with. She's an educator as well. And Marianne is between, I forget where, I think she's partly in Scotland and then somewhere else located in the US as well. And she's been working in this project called Crisis Farm. And so you guys can have projects that are already underway. And perhaps you're using this you've already passed several milestones and now you want to continue the research and pass another milestone in a wider scope of a project. And maybe that's what you guys present. So Marianne did just this, and she started pushing her research forward, looking at victory gardens and the benefits of gardening, and was working towards a community project. Susie Johnston was working with clay from decommissioned oil wells to hold. Oh, it's a shame I don't have a picture of. She's done some really powerful work engaging with not only the clay, but also the sort of raw metal encasings of oil wells. And it was just so powerful because I think it's a great example of how the medium can really be the message sometimes. Like, where what I'm inviting in this class, right, is for you guys to see the materials you're working with as active living agents in themselves, right? So you're kind of in collaboration with them, and they're having their way with you as much as you might be with them. Um, and Here is another project where this person was first like sort of researching local ecology, observing, and then bringing those observations into their studio and generating more formal works as a result. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and I'd love to do a little writing exercise with you guys if you're up for it. And I have a community, actually, well, let me show you. I wanted to show you too, Snezana, if you are watching, where, because you had a question about sharing each other's work. And so here's our Google document. And when we scroll all the way down here is where our art share is. So, and Snezana, I'll put you in here while people are writing. I'll put your Instagram account that you sent here. And yeah, so this is where you can see what other folks in the class are up to. And here is where the free write is for those who are watching the recording. This is where you can access the free write that we're about to do. So I've kind of broken down everything I was just talking about into four simple headers. One is establishing needs, defining your own sustainable development goals. And this is sort of how Yvonne was framing this when I was first working with him, but I think of it less in terms of a formal sustainable development goals, but like what are your goals in your practice in wanting to take this course, and perhaps deepening your practice into the realms of sustainability. And three, interbeing in relationships, right? And I have some sub questions here to guide you guys for each of these sections that we talked about. And then lastly, what's my plan, right? So I love community writing. I've done a lot of these in different classes where we're sort of collectively writing and responding. And so what you guys can do, and you should all have editing access. Let me just make sure. I'll put the link in the chat as well. Okay. So what we'll do, so you put your name here, and then you'll just start responding to these questions. And I'm gonna give us about um, 6 minutes per section, and then we'll pause and do a quick bio, like 5 to 10 minute bio break before the artist talk. Does that sound good with everybody? Okay. So hopefully you should all have access. And I think in the meantime, what I'll do is, and you guys can look at the questions here, but I'm gonna put up the slides that we were looking at pertaining to each of these sections. Right. So first we're sort of inquiring what are the needs of your in your work and in your community. And uh, do let me know if anybody has trouble accessing the writing document. Feel free to turn your camera off, to put some music on, because we're going to be doing this over the next like 20 or so minutes. And I'll tell you guys when it's time to switch to the next question. Then I'll go to the next slide too. So, and for free writing, typically I would suggest, as some writing teachers have counseled me, to don't think, just write. Just let whatever is going to come out come out. And even if you have to start with something as obscure as like a stop sign, then like you'll find your way to where you need to go. Okay, I will stop talking now. We're going to move on to the second question in just about a minute. You guys can always come back to these sections too. Okay, so now as you're ready, we're going to move on to number two, defining my sustainable goals. So how to locating ourselves in this practice, right? As you're ready, yeah, start number two, and I'm going to put up the original questions that we were looking at as well, right? So locating our own values. What does your work stand for? What are you trying to do in your work? Why is it important to turn towards sustainability in your practice? And what barriers might you guys face in trying to do that work? In just about 1 minute, we're going to move on to interbeing. Okay, as you guys are ready, we will next turn to interbeing in relationships. So, how are these goals that you have part of wider networks around you? Who, what, where does your practice engage, human and non-human? How is the culture around you impacted? Are there relationships of mutual benefit that you might um, engage? What can you contribute? What would you like to receive? And I'll put up the slide we had on this as well around interbeing. Okay, in just a minute, we're going to move to our last section, which is what is your plan? And it's okay if you're just thinking this through or building upon a pre-existing plan that's already underway. Okay, yeah, as you're ready, you can start with the last writing prompt around what is your plan. Okay, in just a minute, we're gonna stop with writing, and you guys can always come back to this, but I just want to give us a little bit of time to transition before Lucia's talk. Okay, so I wanted to, before we pause for a quick bio break, I just wanted to clarify what is ideally expected of you for next class, because now is the point in the class where we transition from like receiving information to creating and doing our own research. By that I mean you guys. So here, hopefully this writing exercise sort of helped you guys locate a project, sorry, a project that you're going to begin orienting towards. And for next class, it's going to be the whole 2 hours is going to be project present research presentations. And so you guys are going to create, I would shoot for about 5 minutes, a 5 minute presentation on where you're at in your research. And just as a reminder, our next class is not until May 3rd. So you have, a little over a month. And the project does not have to be finished by any means, even in our last session where you're going to present, um, a more formal presentation as which will be at the culmination of the class, the end of the class. Even then, your project could still be underway, but you're sort of presenting an evolved iteration of it from next class. So each person will have, depending on how many people come to class, usually it's somewhere between like 8 to 15 minutes each to present. But I recommend that your presentation is only about 5 minutes to leave some time for dialogue, like give asking questions or receiving feedback from the class as a whole. Um, does anybody have any questions about this? You can also, some people are not so tech savvy. You're welcome to send pictures to me or a slideshow to me, and I can share my own screen and you can just sort of walk us through it. Um, and I also, lastly, before we take a quick bio break, I just wanted to say, I know we got a little, I, I, I'm trying to sort of, I wanted to hold some space for the weight of our times as I was sort of bringing it from the beginning of the class. But I also hope that you guys are able to find joy in the work that you're doing. I had Sylvia Frederici, who's an important scholar, educator, writer, Marxist feminist, and she was giving a lecture at my school last semester. And, it was a powerful lecture. And towards the end of it, somebody was sort of asking this question that was like, it was rather desperate. It was like we're in a rather desperate times. How do we move through this? And her response, which really stuck with me, is like, we've got to make these movements sexy. We've got to like you have to be able to find joy in the movement work that you're doing, or you're gonna burn out. And further, if you're having fun and you're loving what you're doing, people are gonna want to come and join you. So I think that like just locating your passion and your joy in the projects that you're doing is really important, especially if you're trying to tackle hard issues. Um, okay, so let's take a 5 minute bio break, and then Lucia will begin her talk. She just joined us. Um, and hi, Lucia. Yeah, so let's take a 5 minute bio break. We'll come back at 3:05. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. And you?
I'm good. It's so great to have you. I was just with Karen Krasinski 2 days ago, and I told her you were coming to speak in the class. She was so excited.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh yeah, I can't wait.
And are you here? Are you enjoying this rain?
I am enjoying, yeah, yes, I am. I'm certainly enjoying the rain. Yeah, I got a couple good walks in the last 24 hours to prepare for the rainy next few days.
Yes, it's going to be some days. I really love the rain, to be honest.
Me too, yeah.
I
Yeah.
love walking in the air.
I used to live in New York City for 6 years, and it was funny if it was my favorite time to go walking outside was when it was raining, partly because everybody was sort of in the away from the rain. So you're just sort of walking down these canyons of buildings in like
Mhm.
the rain, and it was such an experience. Um, are you in your studio right now?
I am in my classroom studio. I have a small studio next to my classroom.
Amazing. It's so
Yes.
cool. Let me make sure you should have screen sharing access.
Should I try?
Oh wait, 1 second. Okay, you should now try. You could. Oh, Lucia, I wanted to tell you too. Because you're local to where I am, um, I have a group show opening up. I'm gonna throw the flyer in the chat. Uh,
Oh, great.
yeah, it's opening at APE Gallery.
Oh, cool. Yes,
Um,
in Northampton, right?
yeah, exactly on Main Street. It's opening on this coming Friday, and one facet of it is we are doing an adaptation of Susan Kleckner, who's a feminist artist from the 80s. She did this piece called Window Piece, where she had a different woman occupy a window space for one full week, living it 24/7 for a
Hmm.
whole year.
Wow.
They're doing a much smaller version, because Susan Jehoda, she's sort of the matriarch of my program. She was a good friend of Kleckner's, and she brought all of her archives to UMass after she passed away. So my collaborator Karan and I have been like going through these archives, and Karan is producing this version for our show. And we do have a few spots left if you're interested in participating. We're having a different woman, queer inclusive artist perform in the window each day the gallery is open. So no pressure. You could just come feel it out.
I'll come
Get the
visit you.
feeling.
I'm very shy, so I don't know if
Oh
I
no, no
um
pressure at all. Yeah.
but I'll definitely come visit. How long will it be up?
It'll be up from April 4th through April 26th.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm
Yeah,
I'm
come
away
either
next
way.
Okay, I'm away next weekend, but I'll email you before I go,
Sure.
in case you are there or
Yeah,
available.
every Friday we'll be activating the gallery from around 5 or 6 to 8 p.m. with performances and shows and stuff. But I'll be there weaving most of the time. You can come weave with me.
Okay, okay. Yes, that I can do.
Yeah,
Uh,
let me know if or when you're coming. I'll try to be there.
sure. Yes, thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely.
Anna, could you see my presentation?
I could, yeah.
Did it work? Okay, great.
Yeah, yeah, it looks good.
Okay. Technology.
Oh, believe me, I have had some trouble running this class because it's an online class and there's so many benefits. It's like people from around the world can join. But it's also it can be really difficult. Like I've had a presenter who just couldn't get internet access or couldn't figure out presenting. but we find our way, you know?
It works. It works.
Yeah.
I didn't get the flyer yet. Did you say you were going to put a flyer on the chat?
Oh, I think I tried, but I think it did something. Oh no, yeah, it didn't go through. Let me try again. Oh, maybe I can't send images. Curious, I thought I could. I'll send you a link.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
absolutely. And people should come be back soon. We can start. UPE.
Hi. Hi, Robin.
There's a link, but yeah, it's called Retangle is the project. Hello everybody. It looks like people are starting to come back. Maybe we can begin with the artist talk. And Lucia, when you're ready, you can take it away. We're very excited to have you.
Hi, Suzanne. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I will do a Zoom presentation. I might see you on a tiny square. So if you have any questions or interruptions, just let me know. It won't be an interruption. Um, okay, so I'm gonna try to share my screen. Do you see my name?
Yes,
Great.
perfect.
Um, so my name is Lucia Monge, which you probably already know from Anna. I am an artist born in Peru, and my whole art practice focuses on the different ways that people relate to nature. And I'm interested not only in the ways that we relate to each other, but how the forms of exchange and how art can be a way to reperform these social dynamics and structures where there are hierarchical structures, for example. And I'm interested in these ideas not only with groups of humans, but also with non-humans. And when I think about sustainability, um, as before coming to speak with you, I think about, of course, the materials and the processes that make my work, but I also think about repetition and collaboration. So I think about it as a practice. And because I don't think sustainability is necessarily achieved through a single work, but rather through these ongoing practice, kind of like riding a bicycle. Like it's impossible to be in balance or find an equilibrium in a practice without being in movement. So I have chosen 3 projects to share that rely both on collaboration and in repetition or iteration. The first project I want to share began in 2010 in Lima, Peru, where I'm from. Lima is the second largest desert city in the world. At the time, it had 2 meters of green areas per inhabitant, whereas the World Health Organization recommended 8. So it had a quarter of what was kind of thought of as healthy. And in my walks through my city, I noticed that not only were there very little public green areas, but they were also unevenly distributed. So wealthier neighborhoods had more green areas. And then thirdly, I noticed that there was a lot of plant mistreatment. And I was seeing trees that gathered trash around their base, that had leaves blackened with smog because it doesn't rain necessarily. And I started to think if it were me, I would get up and leave, or at least I would move to the side to kind of dodge some of these bottles or bags that were coming my way. So then I wondered, what would it be like to encounter a walking forest that had taken to the streets like any other group of people would do, demanding for respect and visibility? And this question of what would happen turned into Plantón Móvil, And plantón is a word in Spanish for a sapling, so a young tree that is ready to be planted in the ground. And it's also a word for a city. And this project takes on both the green that is going to be planted and the peaceful protest. So after we take to the streets and we walk, we plant in public space, either creating a new green area or contributing to an existing one that needs help. And on the left, you can see a planting in Peckham in London, and on the right in Comas in Lima. Plantón Móvil has happened since 2010 with different plant and human communities in cities such as Lima, London, Minneapolis, Providence, New York, Paris, and this coming year in Pamplona in Spain. And essentially the project is about moving with as a form of solidarity. And it can adapt to different cities because on one hand, to advocate for public green spaces as a basic right for everyone is not an issue particular to my city, as I used to think. For example, here in the US, in predominantly white areas, trees cover a third of the surface, whereas in communities of color, the trees cover barely a fifth of the ground or of the surface. And from an environmental justice perspective, to advocate for public green areas means not only choosing the location of these areas, but also being mindful of practicing accessibility in terms of plants and resources to make sure that the plant areas can be sustainable and also independent. And when I say independent, I don't mean independent from humans, independent from their care or their relationship, but I'm thinking of independence from the human systems of inequality that created that imbalance or that uneven distribution in the first place. So in some ways, for me, when I think about this, from the beginning, I started to think that we needed to work with native plants or species that are adapted to the local environment and use whatever resources are available, such as the quality of soil or the water availability. We also engage in seed exchanges and cuttings, do exchanges of swapping cuttings and thinking of ways of reproducing and sharing plants in different ways. And I bring this up also because one thing that is important to me is that I started this project in a desert city, thinking that the problem was that, at least in Lima, there was I think people thought or some people thought that what we needed was poster-like gardens. And these poster-like gardens that come from environments like, French gardens or English gardens where there's a lot of rain, actually created a lot of stress for the local conditions, and then also related to this inequality around wealth. So instead, the project focuses on how do we value those local aesthetics and the local environment. The project happens through the collaboration of so many people who join the project for very different reasons, and with the support of environmental, educational, and artistic organizations. It's been supported by galleries, universities, or public schools. It's been supported by museums and the United Nations Environmental Meeting, COP20. And the picture that you see here is one of these examples. This was a Plantón Móvil in 2019 that happened in collaboration with local community members in Queens and the Queens Museum. And the whole Plantón Móvil was focused on plant and human migration. Before the walk, usually I do workshops, sometimes inviting other people to give these workshops as well. And in this case, we focused on medicinal plants from Latin America, food cycle, plants and memory, plant reproduction, all kinds of ways all of the kinds of ways in which plants and people move. one of the perks of repetition for me is that throughout the years of walking with plants, I have learned a lot. And I began the project inviting people to come serve as transport for a group of plants. And the participants were encouraged to think of creative, non-pollutant vehicles that they can adapt to move the plants with. But in time, I wanted to move away from the pulling and pushing action that involved the vehicles. And then I'd rather shift the focus towards the idea of moving with. So I started hosting these workshops where we built what I call plant-human connectors. And physically connecting ourselves to a plant is a literal representation. I'm aware of that. However, what I'm interested is in what happens when the ties are gone. So my focus and my intention is not in the connection itself, but rather in the embodied memory of that connection. So what happens when the fern leaves your head, or when the oak that was attached to your back is no longer there? How do we think of balance and weight as we move through everyday situations, or yeah, how can that potentially embodied memory carry in other moments in life? And I like this concept that the Peruvian anthropologist Marisol de la Cadena brings up in Earth Beings. Marisol talks about purikmasi, which is a Quechua term to describe walking partners. And it's a concept that acknowledges how individuals can learn and expand what they can do themselves when they are walking with someone else, when they're walking together, and precisely because they are different, because of what they each bring. And ultimately, the project is about it's not necessarily about one plant moving or one person moving. It's about the collective movement. And when people come to participate, it's very important for me to stress that we are not performing plants, and we are not just carrying plants either. So it's something in between, where we are the forest. And in a forest, or like other forests, we're composed of differences. So there's no need to be the same. The next project I will share is titled Unearthing Futures. And this project is also a collaboration with the artist Xin Liu. And the project starts with another question. Perhaps I should add that as a common place for these projects that I'm sharing. This project starts by asking, who gets to go to space, and who even gets to imagine themselves going to space? And thinking about how the dominant narrative of the future and of space exploration is following Western aesthetics and politics that are a continuation of colonialism. This idea that we search for new territories, or even the term discovery, is really motivated by extraction, and it's supported by the exploitation of people here on Earth. So as a response, Shin and I sent 150 Peruvian potato seeds to space. And their journey to space became the beginning of a series of conversations on how to reimagine space travel. And we chose potatoes because they are a symbol of diversity. In Peru, there are more than 4,500 varieties of potatoes. To give you an idea, commercially in the US, around 8 are grown. And for us, we didn't see them as a food source or biological specimens that we were including in the travels, but we thought of them as fellow travelers or even co-pilots in the mission. And this picture is seed selection. I'm selecting the seeds that went to space. So on March 6, 2020, MIT Space Exploration Initiative launched a payload into lower Earth orbit. And this payload included 9 artist project that, in their words, quote, challenge the ways we engage with outer space, end quote. And the payload stayed in the International Space Station for a month before returning to Earth. And our projects, our potatoes, were included. Because of space constraints, we couldn't send actual potatoes. So we thought of the project before we knew how much space we would have for our work. And then we found out the container you see on the left is the pocket where the artworks needed to fit inside. So we couldn't send potatoes. And we then moved and we learned about TPS, which is short for true potato seeds, because usually potatoes, as you know, can be grown by just you make a hole on the ground, you plant a spud, and then you have a new plant to grow. But potatoes produce flowers, produce berries, and inside these berries, there are tiny seeds. To give you an idea of scale, the diameter for the container was around the size of a Cheerio, and each of the potatoes, the TPS, are the size of a quinoa grain. On the right, you see a dehydrated berry. When they returned from being at ISS for a month, we planted them in our backyards. I should mention that this project would have been impossible without the collaboration of the International Potato Center, which I always have to stress that it's not part of the project. They exist, and it's organization based in Lima, in Peru, but has headquarters all over the world, and they do a lot of work around potatoes, diversity, and understanding of this crop and plant. Anyway, this is the first harvest of potatoes from the seeds that were on ISS. And at the end of the summer, we selected some of the seeds and then we planted them again the following summer. And we have been planting them since 2020 because this is the only way to keep the strain of space potatoes alive. So if we grow them from the spud, then there are direct clones from the potatoes that went to space. In a way, as cool, there's probably a more formal word, but as cool as it is to have potatoes in space, for me, when the potatoes return to Earth, that's when the work really begins. From the complications that we had growing the potatoes on Earth, which I think is significant. To give you an idea, I was living in Portland, Oregon at that time, and there were unprecedented wildfires. So I had to leave my home, and the potatoes were in the yard, and like the color of the sky and the amount of smoke in the air, not to mention it was an incredibly hot summer. So there are all these challenges of the environment here that I think are right there with the complexities of sending them to space, which I think is interesting. Part of the work also involves doing workshops with elementary children in public schools. And the first time I did this was in Portland, again, through a residency with KS MoCA. I have done some work later on in Amherst through a collaboration with the Mead Museum. Shin and I also hosted a public event at Pioneer Works in Brooklyn for people of all ages. And this year, I'm hoping to also collaborate with the Amherst Regional Public Schools to do a program with second graders, where the students receive potatoes and grow them in their schools. For the first one, I usually call them Space Potato Academy, and each student receives a potato and a booklet with drawing prompts. And for this one with KS MoCA, I met with them bi-weekly. As you might have noticed, since the potatoes left and came back in 2020. So this program happened during the pandemic. So we met over the computer, we talked and we drew and we exchanged information about potatoes and thoughts about the potatoes. And for the Space Potato Academy, the prompt was to help these potatoes get to Haumea, which is a dwarf planet in the Kuiper Belt. Um, during this time, we discuss the relationship between form and function in nature. We talk about biomimicry. So that the students can design the ships, the spaceships, considering the type of mission, considering the conditions of Haumea, the topography. They design their spacesuits. They have to think of the potato's entire life cycle to accommodate how the tubers change shape during their long trip to Haumea. And then we also talk about the varieties of patterns and colors found in potatoes to expand the astronauts' typical white suits. And these prompts that we give students, in a way, we have followed ourselves, and we have been making sculptures with these same ideas. And I think overall the project has an element of play and humor. But seriously, I do think that potatoes offer the possibility to radically reimagine space exploration, because in their plant ways of being, they can show us other ways of moving through space, thinking about relationships to the land and to other living beings. In general, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but most of my works focus on plants. I mentioned that it was about relationships with other living beings, but most of them are plants. And I think that to learn from plants is to learn about all kinds of things like that serve our human experience. Like it's about interspecies relationships, and it's about community. We can talk about migration, about how to make place. Plants relate to culture and relate to politics. And in a way, they teach me about change, about urgency, and also about patience. When I started Plantón Móvil, the first project I shared with you, I wanted to focus on plants and trees that lived with me in the city. I was wanting to talk about them as neighbors. And I felt a lot of people would agree with me at the time in conversation that we had to conserve large rainforests like the Amazon. However, their everyday practices with how they cohabited with the plants in the city showed otherwise. So back then I wanted to focus on these everyday practices of care and how they are closely linked to issues that might seem larger or distant. This project now deals with that distance, and instead of plants moving across the ground or on the streets, it's about plants communicating and exchanging underground. This project is titled Es Bosque Desenterrando Señales, and it was also made in collaboration with Janine Tapja and Gabriela Flores del Pozo. The three of us are a collective, all from Peru, and we are called Fibra. We describe this project as a fungi broadcast of deforestation in Ucayali in Peru. In a forest, with this audience, you probably all know, but I'm just gonna say it just in case. In a forest, tree roots and fungi, their hyphae, which are their root-like structures, connect underground, and they form these vast communication and exchange networks. These mycorrhizal networks define a symbiotic relationship, and got me particularly excited when I learned about them, because they are an example of collaboration in the forest that really complicates this dominant narrative of survival of the fittest, where everyone's elbowing their way through. And mycorrhizal networks inform and inspire the project's shape. Like in a mycorrhizal network, the fungi in our project are communicating the story of these trees in the Amazon. You can see on the right, what's closer to the corner on the right is the map of Peru. And then there is a highlight to the area of Ucayali. And then you can see a pink square. That's the area of our focus of our research. The background image is kind of like a zoom in into that area. In 2019 alone, in this area in Ucayali, there was a forest lost that people estimated to be equivalent to 67,360 soccer fields. And the main causes of forest loss in this region are illegal logging, land trafficking, and palm oil plantations. And this map here shows the impact of one company's palm oil plantations in 4 years. And this specific company has been, did you see that? Oh, yeah. It did change, right? Okay. So all that pink is those pink shapes are the impact of this company. And you can see the white line, that is the ancestral lands for the community, the indigenous community of Santa Clara Uchuña. So they have been encroaching on these communities' lands for a really long time. Desbosque is an installation of sculptures that we co-created with fungi to broadcast recent deforestation data and turn the exhibition space. We wanted it to feel like an organism that was pulsing on the same frequency as tree loss. So we made more than 60 sculptures shaped as human communication tools. And this process involved making molds of TVs, radios, laptops. We had walkie-talkies, megaphones, cell phones, payphones, or telephones. And then to cast them, we filled molds with agricultural waste, such as corn cobs and corn husks. And then we introduced oyster and ganoderma mushrooms to grow and feed from this material. In time, as the mushrooms grow and reproduce, they bind the material until a solid form is created, like this one. And I'm happy to talk more about this process if that is of interest to anyone. As I mentioned earlier, the installation included also sound and lights that interpreted this deforestation data. And we got the data from the satellite monitoring platform called Global Forest Watch, which I highly recommend. It's open access and you can zoom in to any area of the world. You can use existing geographic borders or your own draw shapes if you're interested in specific areas. The deforestation data that we had included more than 300,000 entries. And we also used deforestation alerts, which are a way in which people can detect a potential threat of deforestation before it's too late. And for that reason, the satellite is very helpful. For the lights in the installation, we collaborated with Ariel Weil, and we mapped the geolocation of each of these alerts into the exhibition space so that every time an alert was received, a light would turn on in the exhibition. And we thought of these beams of light in parallel to how light enters a forest every time a tree falls down. Inside the sculptures, we embedded speakers that reproduced a sound composition. And this was an interpretation of the area of tree loss in the area for the last 10 years. And the sound was composed to play in a distributed way, the same way that mushrooms organize. So different speakers turned on at different times and the sound moved through the installation instead of coming from a single location or outside or on top. And to do this, we collaborated with the sound artist, Brian House, who designed a software to interpret the data and then composed a sound piece that translated these data into a 10-minute composition. For Fibra, it was important to create an experience of deforestation in an urban context in the city of Lima, which is the capital of Peru. And aside from showing it here in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Lima. We also have shown this work in Mexico City. We've shown it in Havana, in Paris, and we will show it later this year in Florianopolis in Brazil. And the goal of this project is to create an installation that allowed deforestation data to be perceived with the body, a place to experience deforestation in a sensorial way with the smell, because you enter the room and there's soil and there's all these mushrooms, and the temperature of the room, and also really the rhythm that we get through the sound and the light. So these three projects, I hope start a conversation. I'm hoping to hear from you. I think something came up on the chat, but I'm not great with technology. So if I stop sharing, I can read at the chat. But thank you so
I
much.
just was throwing in the Global Forest Watch website.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was I'm such a huge fan of your work. I love the
Thank
way you think. And also as a collective too. I have a question, but I wonder first if anybody else has some questions. Something I was wondering about is if you could talk a little bit about how you came into um, this mode of working and engagement with plants, like what sort of earlier experiences or curiosities or areas of study um, brought you to this mode of working.
you. Um, I think that more than a mode of study, I grew up very close to my grandfather. I talk a lot about him as a source of the beginning. And I think spending time with him in his garden is kind of my first classroom. And he would spend a lot of time with us, just sitting there and observing and looking who was around, who would show up. Um, I had the I don't know if strangest is the word, but like particular pets growing up, because he would bring animals from the lab that were the experiment was over, and before they would kill them, he would bring them to the lab. So I had like Andean frogs for a while, or all these kinds of animals that would intersect with our time together. So I think growing up next to him and learning about what we can really understand by just patience and observing, it was really formative for me.
Mm, that's beautiful. And your dad, when you say the lab, was he a scientist?
Yes, my grandfather was a scientist. Yes, and he studied high altitude sickness, the chronic conditions for people in the mountains in the Andes. Um, and my great grandfather did the same work. So there was a lot of conversation in my house around that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I can see too the influence of sort of scientific approaches to the work very much in your practice. Um, yeah, I am thinking back to when I grew up in, sort of American context, hyper individualistic, very materialistic. And I began studying medicinal herbalism, but through a teacher who was teaching in through the lens of plant spirit medicine. And so the way that we would learn about a plant is we would sit in a circle and she would give us some tea from a plant, but she wouldn't tell us what plant it was. And so we would just sort of we would go on a date with the plant, we would sit with it for 15 minutes and sip on the tea and sort of listen to what would come up in our bodies and our psyches. And it was a striking experience for me because it was sort of a turning point in my own personal life where I recognized how atrophied my relationship to my own intuition was in terms of being able to perceive and relate to the non-human world. And I throughout that course developed deep relationships with plants as companions and as active agents unto themselves. And it's just so inspiring to me the way that you think and hold space for that in your practice. It's so beautiful. There's a question in the chat from Suzanne. Suzanne, do you want to ask it or do you want me to read for you? Oh, you're on mute.
So, okay, there, I'm unmuted. Hi, Lucia. Thank you so much for that
Hi, Susan.
really inspiring presentation. I so enjoyed learning more about your practice and those three projects in particular. And I had a question, it's kind of like a side question to what you were talking about, but I'm interested in this idea of, working with other artists to create. And it sounds like you did that in different ways on these projects, but you mentioned one, like a collective. Can you tell us more about that? Like, how did you find people to work with? How is it creating with other people? And how did you form this collective, Fibra? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. I really love working in collaboration, and perhaps the connection with the question that Anna, you were asking, a lot of the times my collaborations are with scientists because I'm interested in different ways of seeing or different tools. And the same applies for artists because we might think we have the same discipline, but the ways that we approach our practices are so different. So the work with Shin was this is the only collaboration we have done. For Planton Mobile, there are people who arrive on the day to participate in a collaborative performance, but then there's also a group of people who are involved since beforehand. Sometimes the project happens without me being in person there, so that involves another type of collaboration. I have like guides and I've written a lot so I can hand material and share material if anybody wants to organize a Planton Mobile themselves. Um,
We would love that.
so so that's another type of collaboration. And for Fibras particularly, La Fibras, they are my friends from a really long time. And we went to undergrad together. And my undergrad, I like to say that they did a really good job in educating me for collaboration because they kind of did everything so individualistic. They did kind of everything to avoid it. We had 4 years of formal training, and then we had our 2 last years where we had our own studios, but they were these small studios, kind of like you would enter your cubicle and then I don't know what the idea was. Like we were going to be struck by lightning and be inspired, and then create these masterpieces. So as soon as I graduated, I've been in collectives ever since. So I do think they did a good job. And in all seriousness, I'm grateful also for my education in other ways. But um anyway, so we were part of a collective together before with more people. And then in 2019, we had left Peru, came back, the three of us in different directions. And in 2019, we met each other again and we decided to form a collective. And we've been meeting weekly for at least 2 hours on WhatsApp since before the pandemic. So we are proto WhatsApp Zoomers, Skypers. We've tried them all. And the more we work together, I think the more the three of us feel that this is really important, not only for us, but because of the art world that many times kind of likes to give the prize to a single person, likes to promote this idea of competition between us. So to be a collective, to always label our work as Fibra, to always advocate for each other, I think it's really important. The three of us are women, Peruvian women, so there is a lot of strength in coming together. So yeah, thank you.
That's beautiful. The I'm a I'm a huge fan of thinking and working collectively. I think the first time that I started working collectively, and it became apparent what's possible when you're working with more people, I like I just couldn't get it out of my system. I had a teacher once who would say that in the word company, in the center is pan, P-A-N. So company, gather around bread. So what is the thing in your practice that people are gathering around? And I'm exploring craft and storytelling, but it could be any number of things, right? Um, I think it can be tricky too to find maybe I'm just thinking out loud here, maybe finding and forming a collective is when you meet the other people who are ready to show up at the degree that you are, like ready to commit to something. I've certainly had some, like off and on, I have some core collaborators that I work with now, but it has been challenging in the past to, if you get really excited about something and then people are like sort of in and out of the project. Yeah.
Yes, I think we're lucky because we're friends, so we're able to tell each other everything,
Yeah.
including the things that you might hold on to people less.
Yeah.
Um, and I also am grateful that the three of us, it's impossible. We've been collaborating for 6 years now, so we haven't all been had the same amount of presence in the time. I have a small child, so sometimes I have
Yeah.
other duties or caretaking, and everyone has their own lives. So I think for us it's also been a learning experience of being taking care of each other and taking turns for
Mm.
each other. So I'll cover you when you need to be 50% here for this project, and then you cover me, and then um so I think that that is a unique form of collaboration for me, because I also understand what you share, that if not everyone is fully 100% there, then it can create resentment. But because we have, again, this repetition or these longer kind of threads, we're able to um, think of presence in a different scale.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful to have the time component
Mhm.
to it. And also operating around an ethics of care and support for each other, like really grounding the collaboration in connection, like genuine connection. Um, does
Yes.
anybody else have any questions? Christina, I saw you come on. Do you have a question?
Hi. I was first off, I loved how you you have this liveliness of term that brings things, really awake. Um, the titles, but then just talking about how the trees interact and want to move. I thought that was just amazing way of putting things. And then
Thank
also
you.
always the use of statistic, which kind of then um, creates a different focus, especially when you're talking about like the urban landscape and the difference in neighborhoods, and that brought that really to life. And then the physical thing of moving, yeah, for me, it's moving the plants and then wearing the plants and feeling. I thought how the project has moved through time is also extraordinarily interesting and inspiring.
Thank you so much, Christina. Yes. One thing that I didn't mention is that when I started, well, I briefly mentioned, right? I started a project inviting people to come serve as transfer for plants because plants couldn't move. And then I was like, wait, but plants are moving. We just can't see them. So then I changed the invitation to we're going to help give them a speed that is noticeable by other humans. And at that point, I was thinking about more the moving with. And then I also realized that as we were giving them a movement that was noticeable or a speed that was noticeable for others, we were also borrowing their slowness. because it is not always comfortable to walk with all these plants attached. So then I moved to walking with and exchanging speeds. So you're right, the project has changed a lot in these now 15 years of working with plants. Thank you.
You know, Lucia, I'm as you say that, I'm remembering a conversation I've had in the past with climate scientists and artists around how our temperate regions are shifting with climate change at a pace that's faster than plants can move to adapt. And so I'm recalling this one project. I think it was through somebody through Metabolic Studio, or somebody who works through Metabolic Studio, which is a project initiated by Lauren Bond out in LA. Um, and they were relocating cacti that couldn't make that journey on their own to bring them to more suitable temperate regions where they could flourish, where they were previously suffering to meet the sort of climate shifts that were underway. Um, and yeah, I think about it, especially in tropical zones where you have such radical shifts of ecosystems within mountain ranges that are so drastic and so diverse. There's a lot to consider there. I,
Yes, Elizabeth Colbert has this in the sixth extinction. She mentions
yeah.
this study done in the Peruvian Andes and how they were measuring how different tree species, the speed at which they moved. So I love all kinds of plants movement because I think they connect to how we understand or perceive agency in them.
Mm,
So for me, this is a type of generational movement. And there are trees that move quick and there are trees that move slow. But some are moving impressively quick. Like there is a type of chiflera that moves 15 times faster than many of the peers in that area. Um, and I think that also connects to assisted migration,
mm,
which I think is so interesting, right? When people are purposefully moving species north and in some cases west to adapt to the changing weather. And I think people have been moving plants for such a long time,
mm,
right? I love that term. I read once about assisted migration and about the magnolia trees. They are a case study for assisted migration for this tree that is thriving in northern climates where it was never present before. And this article I was reading talked about how the magnolia tree escaped cultivation, which I just love. I think Christina talking about titles, I think that's a title waiting to happen, like escaping cultivation. So they literally escaped the manicured garden and started thriving in other spaces. And for some people, they are not only non-native, but they are considered invasive. So then you have all these interesting conversations around who belongs, who doesn't belong. And I have my own personal answers, but I think it's an interesting conversation regardless, right? It opens up an interesting conversation.
absolutely. And I want to like open that up more, but I also want to hold space for there's another question in the chat. One short one is but from Robin is asking if it's okay for her to contact you with questions at your email address. Um,
Yes, that's my email address. I also use Instagram, which my Instagram is Lucia Monge Studio. I can write it here. Took me a
Yeah, if you
second.
throw in the chat, I'll save the chat, you guys, and I'll put it in at the bottom of the Google Doc. I have an extra notes section where I throw some class notes in there. Um, and then another question for you from Shazana, who is a little bit sick right now, so I'm going to read it. Have you encountered any difficulties with growing fungus on objects? Did the fungi continue to grow in the gallery as well? Lastly, many thanks for sharing your fantastic and meaningful artworks and your practice with us.
Thank you so much. I hope you feel better soon. I added my email. Oh yes, you had it as well. And I'm happy for the contacting in afterwards. Mushrooms. I love mushrooms. Mushrooms have already been talking to plants and trees for a long time. So that's how I got excited, because I thought they could be a good introduction. Um, yes, there's always difficulties, but the difficulties are actually the best part, I think, because when we grow, when we're cultivating mushrooms for a while, there is a risk for other living beings to come and join, for example, mold. And so you're creating these living conditions that are perfect for your fungi, but other fungi might also come to grow that you necessarily don't want to grow. Or, for example, I create this mold and then the mushrooms don't fruit. And I think I'm doing everything exactly the same. I think I have the same amount of humidity, and it's, I did everything exactly the same as I did last time, but it's not working. And fungi have these different ways of perceiving their environment, and they have these different sensibilities. So what I think is the same is clearly not the same for them. So so that brings some challenges. And also, the reason why I think it's a perk or a benefit for me is I, for example, can work with plaster. If anyone has made up work with plaster, you mix your plaster, it will it will start to warm up, it will get very hot, and then it cools down and it's ready. So in an hour, it's kind of ready, but if you want it to fully cure, you wait 24 hours. It's just like everything is so set in their ways. But when you're working with fungi, you're working with a living being. So um, the difficulties I think are the same as in any other collaboration. But I think for me personally has been a gift to adapt my own time and my own pace in my making to another living being's temporality or rhythm. In the exhibition, they didn't continue to grow. They lose their water, they dehydrate, and then they stop growing. And thank you for your words on my work. I hope that answers your question. Maybe a long way to answer. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been so wonderful and generative to have you here and
Thank
all of
you.
the entities that you bring with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Saturday.
Thanks, Lucia. I'm recording this class and I'll send you and everybody the recording.
Great. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Hi, everybody. I'll see you for your presentations next class. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions in the meantime. And Suzanne, I'll stay on and chat with you for a few.